Dust clung to her boots, the desert wind whispering through the mesquite as the sun bled low over the hills. She tried to lose it, slowed her horse, sped up, even turned back once. But the small, starving fool kept coming, limping after her shadow like it had nowhere else to go. "You're still following me?" she whispered, her voice breaking against the quiet. Its ribs showed like sorrow beneath the skin, eyes hollow but pleading. That's when she saw it. The reason it wouldn't leave, and the sight shattered something deep inside her. Before we ride deeper into the story, if the spirit of the old frontier still stirs your heart, the campfire tales, the courage, the dust, and the honor, then saddle up with us. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Dust clung to Mara's boots and the brim of her hat cut a thin shadow across a face carved by sun and stubbornness. The basin rolled out before her like an old wound, cracked and dry, and the last of the day smeared itself bloody along their ridgelines, the world a burned orange photograph that refused to fade. Her mare moved with the tired cadence of a creature that had carried burdens too long, one hip loose with age, the other muscles knotted from work. Mara felt each step as if it were a small betrayal, every acre ledger of years spent trading sweat for small mercies. For hours the land had been a hush, the kind that presses on your ears until even thoughts feel loud, and then, barely more than a memory at first, there was the soft rasp of hooves, an echo she told herself, a trick of the wind. But when she glanced over her shoulder, the dim shape did not disappear. It kept coming, a thin, persistent silhouette dragging itself across the low brush, ribs like a knuckled map beneath dried hair, eyes too old for a creature so young. She spat into the dust and urged her mare forward, because mercy in these parts was a dangerous currency. Give too much and a dozen men would gladly take it and sell it back to you in pieces, and because strays died quick where coyotes learned the names of every gust. "Go on," she muttered, a softened bark meant to hush the thing she'd seen but did not want to see. The foal did not bolt, though the sound should have sent it running. Instead, it kept pace on a gait of broken resolve, legs wobbling like a promise about to be broken. Night pooled around the mesas and stars pricked cold and indifferent above them. The whisper of mesquite leaves sounded like a chorus of small judgments as the mare's breath turned to smoke, and Mara felt the weight of a decision she'd been avoiding for years, a ledger of duties unpaid. She'd once believed in clean choices, right, wrong, a line you did not cross. Life had taught her those lines were riverbeds shifted by storms, mud that swallowed intentions and left embarrassment in its place. Still, something in the fool's eyes snagged at the part of her that had once knelt in a dirt yard with a child on her lap, telling stories about the stars. She did not speak the name aloud, would not let that memory loose into the wind, but it hummed behind her ribs like a hidden song. The fool's coat was caked with the color of the earth itself, dull and stubborn, its mane a thin, scraggly a thing clinging to a neck that should have been glossy with spring. Each inhalation drew a faint rattle, each exhale a small surrender. Mara rode on because movement keeps you sane. The horizon promised nothing but another ridge, another same, and yet every time she looked back the fool's silhouette remained, a punctuation of need against the plain. She cursed, low and private, because cursing buys time. She cursed the world that made such choices necessary. Cursed the men who left traps and fences where animals trusted paths. She cursed a younger version of herself who had believed courage was enough to man sorrow. The wind carried the smell of smoke from a distant line of scrub, maybe a lightning scar, maybe a man's fire, and for a moment she wondered whether the fall had been born into ruin or brought to it. She tried to set the distance between them, tried to lose the small shadow in a sweep of dust and fainter stars, but it followed like a question left hanging, simple, stubborn, unavoidable. "You're still following me?" she whispered into the wide, as if the words could stitch an answer from the thin air. The voice cracked on the last syllable, and the fool lifted its head as if to reply, eyes pleading with a clarity that made her throat tighten. That night, under a sky that looked as if it had been burned on purpose, Mara made her horse kneel and she unwrapped a piece of hardtack, crumbs for a ghost, and the fool watched with a hunger that was not only for bread but for something larger, recognition, witness, maybe the faint promise that it would not be forgotten. Night draped itself across the creek like an old shawl, threadbare and full of stories, and Mara moved with the practiced economy of someone who'd learned to make small comforts last. She stacked a few dead branches, coaxed a sputtering flame into a steadier glow, and sat with her back against the mare's warm flank while the world leaned in and listened. The foal stayed at the edge of the light, a dark shape rimmed in gold, watching with an attention that felt more like mourning than curiosity. She broke a piece of hardtack in half and tossed the smaller portion toward the animal, an offering, a test, a measure, and the rock she sent skittered past its hooves. It did not run, only circled once and then stood, head bowed, as though asking permission to take what little mercy was offered. "Go on now, find your herd," she muttered, not to the foal so much as to the memory that had taught her to keep moving and to keep her hands to herself. The wind took the words and scattered them among the mesquite like so many useless seeds. The foal's coat caught the firelight in places and did not gleam so much as carry the dull luster of the earth. Its breathing was a thin, uneven rhythm that matched the brokenness of the night and the way Mara's muscles learned to hold themselves closed against feeling. She wanted to be stern. There are chores in life that require a hard jaw and colder hands. But when the small, desperate whimper came, a sound that was half plea, half refusal to accept fate, something in her folded and opened in the same motion, as if an old hinge finally let go. It surprised her. She had convinced herself, for years, that sentiment was a luxury and that pain was something best catalogued and filed away under lessons learned. The sound tugged at a place she kept trapped, not only the memory of the child who once ran barefoot beneath the summer that had since turned to dust, but something softer still, a vow she never named aloud. She told herself to sleep. Sleep was a practical thing out here, a wedge between tasks. But the fool's whimper threaded through the dark and threaded into her dreams, turning them into a slow, insistent ache. Images of small hands, of a bonnet snagged on a fence, of laughter cut short, and when she woke to the moon low and pallid, the creek bed black as a secret, that ache had not dimmed but had sharpened into a kind of clarity she could not turn away and behold. The night held 1,000 small sounds, the distant bark of a coyote, the cluck of a lone quail, the sighing of grass against rock, every one of them measured against the fool's patient presence at the fringe of the fire. Mara watched the animal, counting the breaths between its chests, noting the shallow rise and fall, mapping injury and hunger and something else, memory, perhaps, or the imprint of a hand it had once known. She thought about the rules people like her carry, rules meant to keep pockets safe and hearts dull. Don't feed strays, don't take risks that aren't yours, don't shoulder other people's mistakes. Those rules, she understood, were good with coin and poor with ghosts. The foal did not simply want food, it wanted witness, a witness to whatever had happened to it in the empty place it kept coming from. Mara had spent a lifetime avoiding neighborhoods of guilt. Now guilt, in the form of a hollow-eyed foal, I'd come to stand at the edge of her light and wait. She lay down on the cool earth because lying is different from surrender. It is a posture that keeps you close to the world and makes listening easier. Pretending not to care was an old muscle. She flexed it, felt it quiver, but could not hold the pose. Under the dim canopy of stars she let the memory and the animal sit beside each other without stitching them together, and when sleep finally arrived it was thin and watchful, punctuated by the fool's soft sounds and the ache of something that had been put off too long. In the morning, she knew, she would have to decide whether to be merely a passerby or to follow the tiny, stubborn lead of a creature who refused to be forgotten. Dawn spilled like thin milk over the basin, pale light seeping into hollows and washing the world in a color that made everything look a little more fragile. And Mara felt the morning like an old ledger opening, pages full of debts she'd long avoided. The fall remained where the creek had been, a dark, stubborn silhouette against the silvered mud, head low, breath thin and ragged, and when the mare shifted and snorted the animal did not bolt but lifted a hollow face as if asking permission to keep watching. Mara broke a crust of bread with hands that had learned to count out mercy in small slices, tossed a piece toward the fold like a test, and watched it creep forward on careful legs, sniff the offering, then step back as if the hunger in its chest was tangled with fear. She murmured, "You won't make it another day." The words a fact and a plea at once, spoken to the fold but really said to herself, because out here days collect like stones and some of them press too heavily on the heart. The animal's ribs showed through the dried coat, the skin over the hip bone thin as paper. Each step was a negotiation with pain, muscles trying to remember youth. She should have turned away. The list of reasons was long and sensible. No feed to spare, No room in a life already full of work and old mistakes. The plain truth that kindness out here often meant a heavier bill later when men with fewer scruples than she's got came looking for things to sell. Yet the sight lodged in her throat like a splinter, the way the fool's eyes caught the light. Not wild, not exactly, but insistently familiar, like a half-remembered melody that made a chest unclench. She thought of the rules she'd learned. Don't take on what you can't finish. Don't make promises you can't keep, and felt each rule loosen as if sand had been poured into the hinges. The creek bed, once a thread of water and life, was now a whisper of mud and pocked stones, but the place still smelled of things that had been. Damp earth, sun-warmed straw, the faint phantom of a child's laugh she would not name aloud. The fool's breathing had a rattle that suggested fever and old scrape wounds. There were scabs along a hind leg that looked like barbed wire had been generous with its cruelty. She lifted her gaze toward the east where the faint smudge of distant oaks marked the water holes, those lifelines that mean the difference between a body that can mend and one that lists toward the inevitable. And against her better judgment, she collected the mare's reins and nudged her forward. Each time Mara moved, the foal trying to follow, limping but determined, and a strange thing happened with each faltering step. Something inside Mara that had been weathered down by years of making hard choices unclenched and softened. It was not a sudden conversion. It felt more like a timeline restoring itself, small increments reattached to a promise she had once, perhaps foolishly, believed in. As they rode, the fool's shadow fell like a question behind them, and Mara found herself answering it not with words but with motion, eased, toward water, toward what might be mercy or further brokenness, but toward a place where the maps still promised relief. She thought of the people who'd taught her the rules, their faces like faded photographs, and realized the rules had been attempts to shelter a heart from pain. Yet here in the light, watching a fragile creature stitch its will to hers, she felt that shelter crack in a way that let something conjure in. The march to the waterholes was slow. The land watched in a silence that felt reverent, and every so often Mara glanced back not to measure distance but to remind herself the fool kept coming, refusing to be left behind, until, by the time the oaks materialized on the horizon and a thin stream winked in the sun like a promise kept, she no longer pretended she had not chosen. By midday the light had lost its mercy and turned honest, throwing clean lines across the river bend where cattails ruffled and water made a thin, insistent song against stone. Mara eased down from her mare with the careful motion of someone who knows every ache in their body by name and who moves like a map already folded. And for a moment the world narrowed to the scrape of her boots on packed earth and the foal's hesitant steps toward the water. The animal knelt with that ridiculous, solemn awkwardness only newborns and old, clumsy saints possess, legs splayed, head low, lips trembling as it sipped, each drink a small victory, each swallow a reclaiming of something stolen by hunger. Mara's gaze flicked across the horizon out of habit. This country keeps score, and eyes at the edge of the land are not always kind. She scanned for smoke, for muted silhouettes that might be men, for the flash of steel in the sun. Predators wore many faces. The river bent in a way that made secrets gather, a drowned stump, a shelf of blackened stones where lightning or careless men had once made a camp. As the flood drank, Mara crouched and the movement revealed an old wound along its spine leg, a jagged white seam crusted with dust and hair caught like bristles on a broom. It was a wound that told its own story, clean lacerations where wire had taken more than flesh, shallow channels where infection had tried to find purchase and failed, a pattern that matched too closely the cruelty of traps left by men who price a beast by the pound and not by the life inside it. She winced, not only because the sight was sharp, because in it lay evidence of intention. Wounds from wolf's bite and tear, wounds from wire signatures. Someone had been careless, or brutal, or worse, someone had considered this animal as ledger and not kin. The foal flinched as Mara reached out. It did not pull away entirely, only trembled as if remembering a hand that had been less kind. Her fingers hovered, then brushed the scar with the gentleness that comes from knowing how much pressure healing requires. The dust rasped her skin and the animal's flinched into a small, grateful shudder. She thought of barbed wire strung like low teeth across a prairie, of men who fenced water and freedom alike, of the laws that bend toward profit and the mouths they leave screaming. A flash of anger rose, hot and blinding, then sank, replaced by the heavier, steadier fuel of resolve. Mara had learned the ledger of compassion. Small kindnesses add up, but so do inaction and the tally of what you ignore. She crouched longer than she intended, watching the fold rink until its breathing changed from ragged to measured. Dust motes hung in the water-silvered air like affections. Around them the cottonwoods whispered. Their leaves made a soft, papery applause that felt almost like approval, and Mara allowed herself a tiny, private smile. The wound required more than the sap she didn't have. Infection could set, and without proper care it would rot its way into the animal's future. Who had done this? A thought slid into her like a stone into still water. Rustlers, maybe, men who nick animals for profit, who cut lag ropes and left things to bleed out later, who traded in the slow cruelty of convenience. Or perhaps some rancher with the sort of hard pride that thinks ownership justifies any cruelty. The possibilities were long, and none of them kind. She stood and walked the bank, scanning the reeds and the crushed grass for other signs. Boot prints too fresh, a scrap of cloth, a sliver of leather that might tell a more detailed story. There, half buried in mud, a thin, twisted piece of red cloth, the sort children used to tie to reins. It had been dragged, not dropped. The sight was a small, terrible corroboration that something had happened here, not long ago. Mara pressed her thumb into the seam of the wound, feeling the hard knot of scar tissue and the faint give of still tender flesh beneath. A memory rose, unwanted and precise. Lottie's small fingers, the last laugh she could no longer call up without flinching. The thought folded into the back of Mara's hands like a hidden card. She did not speak the child's name, but the land remembers names anyway, and sometimes it leaves them in things like scars. The foal lifted its head and met her eyes, those hollowed, pleading orbs that knew exhaustion better than most men. And in that instant Mara understood two things with the clarity of a gunshot. The creature had not followed her for pity. It had followed because home, whatever had been left of it, was here at the river bend, and whoever had branded that wound into its hide might not yet be far. Heat pressed down like a bad memory, and the day baked everything to a flat, humming truth. Mara felt it in the hollow of her cheek where sun had burned twice, and in the slow, stubborn ache beneath her ribs that never quite left. The place grief had taken up residence and paid rent in size. The full pattern of her married shoulder, shifting its weight and breathing in the slow, small rhythm of bodies that have learned to survive by sheer stubbornness, and each tiny, uneven intonation made a bell toll somewhere behind Mara's eyes, because years ago a sound like that had become a memory that never stopped replaying. Lottie, hair like a bright flag in the wind, laughing as she ran after a colt that had thrown its owner and taken to the scrub like it was running toward a secret. The stampede had been a mercy and a ruin at once, an avalanche of hoofs that no one could quite stop, a sudden orchestra of terrified power, and Mara had watched everything she loved get folded into dust and distance, had felt the world tilt and keep tilting until she learned to hold everything with two hands and a face that did not crack. Guilt had been her companion ever since, a small, persistent voice that whispered of what she hadn't done, of a hand she hadn't reached out in time, of a lullaby sung to a shadow of a bed. She had built rules around that guilt. Don't let children wander. Don't trust the colt's sudden hunger. Keep your flanks tight and your eyes open at all hours. Rules that keep you steady but leave you hollow. Now, watching the foal drink and shift and wince, those rules felt like brittle pages blown by the wind, each one folding back to reveal a scene she had tried to bury. Lottie's small boots skittering on dust, the sound of a rope snapping, the way the little girl's voice had been swallowed by the chaos, and the image struck through Mara like a splinter. She gripped the brim of her hat with fingers that had learned to work tools and not tenderness, felt the leather warm beneath her thumb, and breathed in so deep the air tasted faintly of river and sage, in the memory of a child who had once filled a kitchen with small disasters and bright, inconvenient joy. Not again. Not this time, she whispered, not because the words had power outside of her throat, but because saying them aloud made them less like a wish and more like a promise, an attempt to stitch a frayed part of herself back together with action instead of excuses. The foal raised its head then, ears pricked in that halting way animals have when they want to know whether the world will be kind or cruel, and Mara no longer saw only an animal. She saw her plea made visible, the meticulous, weary pleading of something that had been left to learn its own language of survival and now wanted, absurdly, to be seen. The creek's light scattered silver across the foal's ribs and made shadows that looked almost like maps, roads taken and roads not taken, and in them Mara read a story she had been avoiding. That loss does not live only in the past, it migrates into the present every time you ignore a small, persistent cry, Her heart, which she had trained to be practical, softened in increments, small, almost imperceptible adjustments, until mercy felt less like a luxury and more like an obligation she owed to a world she had once tried to harden against sorrow. She thought about the ledger of her life and found a credit she'd overlooked, a capacity to act that had nothing to do with reputation or reckoning, only with being human enough to answer when something called. Around them, the cottonwood side and the river moved with a patient, indifferent grace. The foal trembled once and nuzzled the mare's flank, and Mara let a sound out of her that was part laugh, part cry, and all relief that the past might not always decide the terms of the future. In that moment she chose, not from bravado but from a place remade by grief's long apprenticeship, she would try again to be the kind of person who shows up. While we catch our breath by this dusty road, go on and tip your hat to the last rodeo. Give this story a like, and subscribe so you can ride with us again soon. Alright then, let's get back on the trail. They followed a path that looked like memory made visible. Old wheel ruts half swallowed by sand, tumbleweed flattened in arcs like commas, and the small, stubborn silhouette of the foal limping in the same crooked line that had been cut through this land long before either of them was born. Mara's boots found the impressions of hoofs pressed into the dust, and she leaned forward in the saddle the way a reader leans toward the last page. Because tracks are truths you can read when tongues lie. The prints were large and unshod, the kind you don't see for honest stock but for animals driven hard with no thought to their feet. Prints that suggested haste or cruelty. The heels flared from hurried turns, the depth a marker of weight and urgency. They pointed back the way the fall had come, toward the rim of the low canyon where shadow pools gathered like secrets and where wrestlers in worse made habit of selling on things other people lost. Mara studied each print as if cataloging a crime. The spacing that told you how the mount had been ridden, the drag that hinted at a stranger's tiredness, a smear here that might have been blood long ago but now only dusted into the edges of the print like an accusation. "You're running from something, ain't you?" she said without meaning to, the voice small and rough, and the foal lifted its head as if it understood in a language older than words. The tilt of an ear, the widening of an eye, that made Mar feel both foolish and strangely less alone. The mare shifted beneath her, uneasy at the change in the landscape. Cattle and coyotes feel the moods of places, and her animal's nostrils flared against a breeze that carried scents Mara could not name. Old smoke, the iron tang of something burned, a faint sweet that might have been molasses or might have been a child's ribbon left to rot. The trail led toward the canyon mouth, narrowing like a throat where the world swallowed sound, and Mara's hands tightened on the reins, not out of fear but out of a precise, practical caution that comes from living where danger is a habit you learn to read. She had a dozen reasons to turn back, no help close by, too few cartridges, the reality that tangled paths often belonged to men who counted teeth in other people's pockets. But the false steps were a compass, wobbling but true, and something in Mara that had learned to tally losses also knew when a ledger called for correction. As they moved, more signs revealed themselves in small, indifferent ways. A scrap of canvas snagged on a mesquite, a length of frayed rope half buried in a wash, the flattened circle of a camp where bottles had been lost and laughter had once been sharp enough to scare birds away. Each mark was a rumor made concrete, and Mar read them in a rhythm that made the blood in her ears slow into a listening. The canyon took them in with the air cooling as if the sun were a door slammed behind them. The walls narrowed, layered in the pale geology of old fires and older storms, and shadows pooled where the trail cut between boulders like the spine of some sleeping thing. She felt the landscape close in with the same intimacy that had once frightened her as a child, the world getting smaller so you could see what had been hidden. At the canyon lip they found evidence of other lives, a tin cup dented and forgotten, the print of a boot too fresh to be a trick of memory, the faint scent of manure tobacco. Someone had been here recently, someone who kept quiet and moved quicker than common kindness. Mara's jaw set. The space between the present and the past thinned into a single line of motive and consequence. She thought of the wounded leg, of the foal's hollow flanks. There is cruelty, she knew, that is accidental, but this was intentional, and intentional cruelty has a voice that demands answer. The foal pressed closer to her mare, leaning as if the animal recognized her as a shield and not merely a stranger, and for the first time Mara felt the mission become not about mercy alone but about justice, simple, narrow, and necessary. She could feel the canyon listening too, the rock keeping counsel with the wind, and the idea that they might find nothing but the echo of wrongdoing felt unbearable. The tracks led on, and so did they, spiraling down into shadow where wrestlers carved fortunes from other people's losses and where the truth of who had left scars would, if she were honest, require her to step into a place she had promised herself never to go again. The sun sank into the basin like a slow bleed, and twilight gathered around the land with the quiet of something holding its breath. Mara rode through it with the mare's hoof striking hollow notes against the hard pan, the foal limping behind in that unsteady rhythm that now felt less like pursuit and more like a shared pilgrimage. Ahead, the world darkened into silhouettes, low fences, a barn skeleton, the hint of what once was life. And as they drew closer, the smell met her first. Smoke, old but not gone. The acrid tang of charwood mingled with something far heavier, older, and crueler. When the wind shifted, ash rose in small, lazy spirals and settled back down as if the place exhaled its own memory. The corral had collapsed in sections, rails splintered and blackened, each one bowing toward the earth as though burdened by the weight of too many ghosts. The barn's roof had caved inward, its beams half buried in silt, leaving a jagged silhouette against the dying light. The foal stopped at the edge of what remained, ears twitching, nostrils flaring in a recognition that seemed to rattle through its thin body like wind through a cracked bell. A soft, broken whinny escaped it, half question, half mourning, and Mara felt it reverberate somewhere deep in her own chest, a sound she knew too well, the echo of loss-made flesh. She dismounted slowly, boots crunching over brittle ash, the faint smell of iron cutting through the fading scent of smoke. The earth bore scars, hoofprints overlapping boot tracks, drag marks where someone, had been pulled. A rope lay near the fence post, blood darkened to rust, fibers stiff with what time had tried and failed to wash away. Beyond it, under a collapsed beam, white shapes caught her eye, bones, bleached by sun and grief, the delicate structure of the horse's skull still half buried beneath blackened hay. The foal took a trembling step forward, lowered its head, and nudged the air above that silent grave as though trying to call something back that the world had already claimed. Mara stood watching, hat in hand, the wind catching strands of her hair and tossing them like pale threads through the smoke. The air was thick, heavy enough to taste, full of things unsaid, fear, violence, maybe regret. She had ridden past dozens of ruins like this before, each one a story too late to change, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the tragedy written in ash. It was the fool's insistence on returning here, to this very patch of broken earth, as if the small creature had been carrying a compass not in bone or blood but in memory. "You weren't lost," Mara murmured, voice rough, the realization coming to her not as logic but as ache. "You came back." The fool flicked its tail once, then pressed closer to the collapsed corral, breathing in the scent of what it must have known once, a mother's warmth, a place of safety, a life stolen. She crouched near the rope, fingers brushing the hardened knots, the grooves cut into the dirt by struggle. This wasn't a fire born of storm or carelessness. This was deliberate, practiced cruelty, the kind done by men who need to make sure there's nothing left to find. She thought of the tracks in the canyon, the bits of red cloth and tin cup, the trail of violence that threaded back through miles of land and silence. The puzzle was coming together, and its picture was uglier than she wanted to see. The wind shifted again, pushing smoke into her lungs, and she coughed, eyes watering not from ash but from something deeper, a recognition of the circle she'd stepped into. The fool turned to her, eyes reflecting the last of light, hollow but unafraid, and she saw in that gaze the same defiance she'd once seen in her daughter before the world took her, something fragile but unbroken. The evening star rose above the ridge like a watchful eye, and Mara straightened, her voice steady when she whispered, "You came back to remember, or to show me." Around her, the air grew still, the land waiting, as if both woman and beast stood on the threshold of a truth neither could yet name but both were bound to face. The wind rose sudden and sharp, threading through the blackened ribs of the barn until the burned timbers groaned like something alive, like memory refusing to rest, and Mara's hand went instinctively to the revolver at her hip, her eyes scanning the ruin for motion, shadow among shadow, the kind that hints at presence rather than accident. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw something move near the far fence, a flicker, a suggestion of form, but when the smoke shifted, only the foe remained, head bowed low over a patch of ground that looked strangely wrong, darker, too smooth in a place where ash should lie uneven. The mare beside her snorted, uneasy, and Mara felt the hair at the back of her neck rise. She approached with deliberate slowness, each step grinding against the silence until the sound of her boots became a heartbeat all its own. "Easy now," she murmured to no one in particular, voice caught between command and prayer, and the foal turned its head slightly, nostrils flaring, before nuzzling that small patch again, pawing at it with trembling hooves. Something about the motion, instinctive, mournful, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She holstered the gun, knelt beside the animal, and let her gloved fingers press into the loosened dirt. The soil came away soft, damp beneath its surface, and when she brushed it aside, her fingers caught on fabric, thin, delicate, faded pink turning to gray in the grime. A bonnet, a child's. For a moment she couldn't move, her hand froze there, holding that fragile scrap of cloth as the world around her seemed to narrow into sound and memory. The wind roared through the ruin again, carrying with it the faint scent of char and something else, sweet, unmistakable, the ghost of lilac soap, and her vision blurred before she realized tears had found their way through the dust. "Lord help me," she breathed, her voice raw as she turned the cloth over in her palm, thumb tracing its frayed edges. Whoever had lived here had done so with love. There had been a child once, small enough for a bonnet this size, a girl maybe, or a boy whose mother refused to let the sun take his face. She looked at the foal, who stood utterly still now, watching her, its eyes unreadable in the fading light, and she understood with a kind of painful clarity, this animal hadn't stayed here by accident. It had come back because it remembered. The ground beneath her wasn't just dirt, it was grief made solid, the place where something had been buried hurriedly, lovingly, maybe both. She dug a little deeper, just enough to see that the patch extended wider, as if someone had tried to hide more than one secret here, and a shiver crawled up her spine that had nothing to do with the chill. She didn't need to find bones to know what the fall had led her to. The story was written in the air, in the silence, in the way the land itself seemed to sag with sorrow. She let the bonnet fall back into place, brushed the dirt gently over it, and sat back on her heels, staring at the horizon that now seemed too far and too empty. Her throat tightened until words became impossible, so she let the wind speak instead, its low howl threading through the timbers like lament. The foal stepped closer, pressed its head lightly against her shoulder, a touch so soft it nearly undid her, and she reached up to stroke its neck, fingers trembling. "You remembered," she whispered, voice barely there. "You came back to show me." In the settling dusk, the first stars began to surface, faint at first, then bolder, as if the sky itself wanted witness too. Mara stayed there long after the light drained from the hills, listening to the ruin breathe, feeling the weight of every story the land tried to bury, and in that silence, she realized she was no longer just an observer of what had been lost, she was its keeper. The first gray of dawn stretched thin across the land, cold and colorless, and Mara stood at the edge of a burned corral with her hat pulled low, eyes tracing the ground that still whispered what the night had hidden. The soil here was a ledger, and the story written in it was fresh. She crouched low, fingers sifting through dust still damp from the morning dew, until she saw them, hoof prints, several sets, deep and uneven, the kind that belong to men who ride heavy and fast. 3, maybe 4 horses, all unshod, their prints headed south, each one marked with the slight inward tilt that comes from being driven hard, not free. She followed the line of them with her eyes until they disappeared into the open plain that rolled toward the horizon, the place she knew too well, the borderlands, where law grew thin and conscience thinner, where wrestlers traded blood and livestock without a thought to what they'd taken. Her chest tightened as she straightened, the wind cold against the sweat along her neck, because she knew that trail, had ridden it once years ago while tracking her own lost herd after a storm, and she remembered the stench of campfire whiskey and the sound of men laughing like wolves. She looked back at the fall, which stood near the fence, head bowed low, the rising sun catching the fine tremor that ran along its ribs. It had led her here, all this way, to the remnants of violence and the faintest hope of truth, and now it waited for her to decide what came next. "So that's where you come from," she murmured, voice steady but low. "South, with men who'd sooner break a thing than feed it." The foal lifted its head at her tone, eyes reflecting light in a way that made them look almost human in their weariness. and something inside her broke open with the quiet violence of realization. This wasn't chance. This creature hadn't been a wandering shadow on her trail. It had been a message, a fragment of what cruelty leaves behind when it thinks no one's watching. Anger welled up slow and hot, like a storm gathering over the flats, not loud or reckless but deliberate, righteous. She hadn't meant to get tangled in this, hadn't meant to care. She was just a woman minding her own distance from the world. But here it was again. Life pulling her toward a wound not her own. The ground told her everything she needed, one set of tracks heavier than the rest. A leader perhaps, his horse bearing more weight, another with a shorter stride, likely favoring an old injury. She could picture them as clearly as if they stood before her, their rough coats, the dust kicked in their collars, the satisfaction of cruelty in their laughter. Rustlers always left pieces of themselves behind. She brushed her palms clean and stood dull, her shadow stretching long and lean across the dirt, and the decision she'd been postponing came for her, quiet but absolute. Whatever piece she'd thought she'd built these last years was gone now, burned away with the corral's timbers. The foal shifted closer, its nose brushing her coat, and she laid a hand on its neck, feeling the thin, rapid pulse beneath the skin, a living drumbeat that seemed to echo her own. "All right, then," she whispered, voice rough. "We'll follow." The mare pawed the ground, sensing the tension in her, and Mara turned south, scanning the distant hills where the light was sharpening into gold, and she felt the anger transform into purpose, clean, cold, and certain. The air seemed to change with her resolve, the wind carrying the faint metallic promise of retribution. Whatever those men had done, whether they'd taken the foal's mother or burned this place to cover their tracks, they had left something behind that would not rest easy. Mara wasn't a lawkeeper or a savior, but she was a witness now, and witnesses carry a duty heavier than revenge, to make the truth seen. The foal gave a soft sound, half whinny, half sigh, and together they began down the trail of men. Mara moved with the economy of someone who packs not for comfort but for consequence. She folded the thin blanket, slotted the spare cartridge where it would be easy to reach, looped the mare's reins over the saddle horn and checked the cinch twice because small mistakes out here cost more than pride. The bull watched with an almost accusing patience, its ribs rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to measure time differently now, and when she gave a short, low whistle it answered without hesitation, limping to her side as if the act of following was a promise kept rather than a favor asked. They left the ruined corral behind and took the trail south where the dust lay in a pall of pale gold, the plains opening like a bleached sea under the sun that hung heavy and unpitying. The horizon shimmered with heat mirages that made distant rocks sway as if breathing, and the land kept its counsel in wide, indifferent strokes, no cheering for the righteous, no pity for the too slow. Each step forward tightened the knot inside Mara, anger that had once been hot now settled into something fuller and steadier, resolve sharpened by memory. The fool's gait was a lesson in determined smallness. It staggered, then steadied, pushed forward on limbs that protested with every pace, eyes set on the woman who had become its strange steersman. Mara felt each faltering stride like a ledger adding weight to her choices. With every wobble, her decision to follow hardened into a shape she could trust. People out here talked a lot about justice like it was a thing you earned only in saloons and courthouses. But justice on the plains was quieter, less about sentences and more about righting a single wrong so the land could tilt back toward balance. It had to be done by someone who would show up. They picked through washes and around hummocks where jackrabbits fled like quick thoughts, across the dry beds of streams that only remembered water in the bones of the earth, and the tracks of men appeared again. The stubborn line, 3 horses' impressions pressed into the world like records that refused to be erased. He threw it on the wind, baking the scent of sage into the air and making the mare's flanks beat with sweat. The foal's breathing grew ragged, each breath a small victory, and Mara slowed her pace without announcing it. She adjusted her stride not because pity dictated but because strategy required strength and reserve. As the sun arced higher, shadows shortened and the land revealed clues in small, indifferent ways. A scrap of torn leather snagged on a mesquite, fresh droppings where a camp had been too recently vacated. The faint smear of blood darkened on a rock like a word half-spoken. Mara tasted anger that was not merely personal. It was moral, an outrage at cruelty practiced like a craft. She rode with one eye on the trail and the other on the fall, feeling the rhythms of both, the measured pull of the mare's motion and the foal's uneven heartbeat at her hip. At times the foal sought shade under a low bush, then pushed itself up and went on, its stubbornness like a prayer repeated until answered. The plains tested them, heat that slowed thought, wind that threw grit into eyes, a loneliness that made decisions heavier. But it also sharpened focus. There is a certain holiness to walking a path you choose because someone else cannot. With every mile, memories she had wrapped tight loosened, Lottie's small boots fluttering across floorboards, the way a laugh used to fill a room. Those images no longer shackled her to inaction, but moved alongside her as fuel. She imagined the rustlers ahead, men who measure worth in coins and muscle, riding careless where the world will not forgive carelessness, and the picture hardened her hand on the reins. The foal's shadow fell long now as afternoon leaned toward evening, and Mara felt the tilt of responsibility like a pack she had willingly taken. Whatever lay at the end of the trail, men, camp, perhaps a bloody truth, would be met by a woman who had once sheltered grief and now carried it outward like armor. They rode on, the mare steady, the foal persistent, the land vast and waiting. The chase was no longer a hunt for pity but a steady march toward a single ledger, make right, or at least try, because leaving a wound to fester is an act of violence of its own, and Mara had no stomach left for that. While we catch our breath by this dusty road, go on and tip your hat to the last rodeo. Give this story a like, and subscribe so you can ride with us again soon. All right then. Let's get back on the trail. The land at Dry Creek Pass was brittle with silence, the kind that hums beneath the skin like a warning, and Mara knew before she saw the smoke that she was closing in on something foul. Evil has a particular smell, part sweat, part pride, part rot. The horizon shimmered under the dying light, and there, rising in a thin coil against the pale dusk, was the gray breath of a campfire. She dismounted behind a knotted juniper, her movements precise, deliberate, the way a hunter moves when the air itself might betray her. The mare snorted softly, uneasy, and Mara patted its neck, whispering a command that was both comfort and instruction. Stay, girl. Then she checked her revolver, 6 rounds, clean chamber, the cold steel biting her palm as if to remind her she still had choices. The foal hung back, trembling but unwilling to flee, and she gave it a long look before slipping forward, her boots silent in the powdery sand. The air carried the sharp scent of burning mesquite and the low, muffled rhythm of men's voices, laughter that didn't belong to anything kind. She crouched low near the edge of a dry wash, easing closer until the camp unfolded before her. 3 of them, rough and unshaven, faces cracked by sun and habit, 2 crouched by the fire, 1 pacing near a makeshift corral hammered from stolen fence posts. Her stomach tightened when her eyes caught movement behind those posts, a horse, or what was left of one. The animal's coat was gray beneath grime, its flank torn and blood-caked, legs trembling under its own weight. Even from here, she could see its eyes, glassy but alive. The fool's mother, tied to a post like a tool left to rust. One of the men threw a scrap of jerky toward it and laughed when the animal turned its head away, and the one with the hat too big for his skull spat into the dirt and said, "Ain't worth much now. Maybe the hide'll fetch something. Price of horseflesh drops with the wind, don't it?" The others chuckled, that dry, hollow kind of laughter that makes the world meaner by echoing. Mara's jaw clenched until pain crept into her temples. Her pulse thudded so loud it blurred the sound of the creek trickling nearby. The words price of horseflesh twisted through her like a brand. She thought of the foal limping through the dust, of its trembling body pressed against her at the burned homestead, and a fury she hadn't felt in years unfurled inside her, slow, molten, ancient. Without thinking, without calculating consequence, she stood. The world sharpened to color and noise, the orange flame, the black hats, the cruel smirks, and before her mind caught up, her hand had moved. The revolver barked once, the sound splitting the canyon like thunder, the bullet biting earth a few inches from the fire. The men froze. For a breath, everything held, the smoke, the sound, the moment, and then chaos broke open. The one who'd been laughing dove for cover, rolling behind a wagon wheel. Another cursed and stumbled backward into the brush, his boot catching on the post that held the mare. The third bolted uphill toward the rocks, disappearing behind the ridgeline with the clatter of loose shale. The tied mare screamed, a ragged, tearing sound that clawed at Mara's throat, and she fired again. Higher this time, not aiming to kill, just to scatter them further. Dust rose in a choking cloud, the echo of gunfire folding back into the stillness it had ruptured. When the last shout faded, only the wind and the mare's labored breathing remained. Mara lowered the gun, hand shaking despite her control, her heart punching at her ribs like it wanted out. She stood in the open now, no longer a ghost in the brush but a reckoning in flesh and grit, and as the smoke from their fire drifted toward her, it carried the scent of victory and grief tangled together. The foal appeared at the edge of the wash, eyes wide, and for a long moment it didn't move, only watched her as if to confirm that what she had done was real, that someone had finally drawn a line in the sand on its behalf. The canyon held its breath, waiting for the next sound, and Mara, gun still hot in her hand, whispered into the wind, "You ain't alone anymore." The three men scattered like startled crows and left a silence so full it hurt. Mara stood with the revolver warm in her hand and the taste of metal at the back of her mouth, heart still hammering but steadier now, a slow drone that matched the foal's small, ragged breath as it crept from the wash to stand by the tied mare's trembling flank. She worked with quick, sure hands, cutting the ropes, pressing cloth to raw flesh, murmuring soft, useless apologies that felt more like promises. And when the mare sagged against her as if the world had finally allowed it a moment of rest, Marta felt a rush of something like relief and something like dread in equal measure, because men who steal goods and men who price animals by weight do not retreat and forget easily. They had gone to the rocks, but that meant nothing. Pockets full of malice find ways back to the places they scoured. She had expected them to slink away or to lick their wounds somewhere out of sight. But the canyon is a small amphitheater for trouble, and trouble often has a stubborn habit of returning with loud boots. She heard the scrape of a boot on gravel before she saw the shadow creep along the ridge, the silhouette of one who thinks himself brave because he has friends behind him. Mara's body tightens like a drawn wire. The first man circled, then another, then the leader, broad-shouldered, mean-eyed, a hat pulled low but with a mouth that said what the rest would do if he nodded. And they came down into the wash like a question that demanded an answer. "Well now," said the leader, voice oily as old jerky, "looky what we got, lady with her hands in what ain't hers." The others laughed, the sound brittle and quick, as if they expected Mar to back down like a woman in a parlor, not a woman who had buried years of grief and come out the other side with a rifle and a sense that some debts must be paid. Mara set her jaw so tight it hurt and did what she'd done all day. Stepped forward until the space between them was a challenge. "Let her go," she said, the words low and steady, not a plea, not a threat, just a fact. The leader spat into the dust and shrugged as if the world owed him the right to be cruel. "Ain't worth much to no one," he said, voice smooth. "You best walk away, lady. Ain't your fight." The full pressed close to Mara's leg, a living counter-argument, and she felt the hot, clean shape of indignation blossom in her chest. There are thoughts you do not choose, then there are thoughts that choose you by making the air smell wrong. She thought of Lottie, of a child who had once laughed in sunlight and then been taken by chaos, and rather than feel the old, knowing guilt, she channeled it. This would not be another ledger left open. "Then this one's mine," she said, and there was a sound in her voice that made the leader pause, a kind of steel that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. One of the men lunged, drunk on bravado. Mara's hand moved with the speed of hound reflex, and the shot cracked, aimed not to kill but to warn, and the bullet snapped the air between them, kicking up a gout of dust at the lunging man's feet. He yelped and lurched back, cursing, while the leader cursed louder, eyes narrowing like a trap ready to spring. For a breath, everything hung, men's intentions, Mara's resolve, the fragile lives tied to the moment. And then the leader made a mistake his kind repeats when fear smells of loss. He counted on numbers, on cruelty and company. And when he moved to draw a blade, Mara was quicker. She fired again, this time grazing the leader's shoulder, the sting of lead sending him stumbling into the scrub. The other two fled into the rocks with the panicked noise of men who know the law catches up in more ways than one. Silence fell like a curtain after a storm. The canyon held its breath as if the earth itself wanted to know what would come next. Mara kept the revolver steady though her hands wanted to tremble, watching the man vanish into dust and shadow. And when at last the last curse faded, she lowered the gun with deliberate slowness, palms steady, the cool metal and familiar weight that had done what words would not. She went to the mare in the foal and worked until the mare's breathing eased, until the soft, almost grateful nudge of the foal against the mare said what neither could say. "We are not done yet?" but this day we have survived. Standing in the wash with ash under her boots and the canyon echoing the small victories and the small wounds, Mara felt something subtle, part justice, part warning, and she knew that this standoff would be a line in the sand that marked not the end but the beginning. Men who think they sell animals like goods would learn that some people keep watch, and that some wounds call for reckoning. Mara's knife slid through the frayed rope with a dry whisper. This sounds small but final, and as the last fiber snapped, the mare crumpled to her knees with the weary grace of something that had been standing too long on willpower alone. Her body folded in on itself, trembling, the raw hide of her flanks still streaked with blood and sweat, eyes glassy yet defiant in their refusal to close. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft, uneven rasp of breath, the air heavy with the smell of smoke, iron, and sweat. Mara crouched beside her, the heat of the animal radiating against her palms, and for the first time in years, her hands didn't know what to do. She'd held drains, ropes, shovels, even graves, but never something so fragile and alive that it felt like mercy itself had been handed back. The foal crept closer, hesitant, each step punctuated by a small, desperate whinny that carried all the loneliness of the desert. It pressed its muzzle against the mare's neck, breathing her scent like a lost child finding proof of a mother's heartbeat. The mare shuddered once, her tail flicking weakly, and answered with a faint nicker that cracked the silence like dawn breaks night. That sound undid Mara. The tears came without permission, hot and unrelenting, cutting clean tracks down her dust-caked face, each one a confession for every year she had buried feeling under survival. You stayed because she couldn't, she whispered, her voice breaking, the words trembling out of her like an admission dragged from the depths. You wanted someone to see. Her throat ached with it, that unbearable realization that the fool hadn't followed her out of hunger or instinct, but purpose. It had been leading her here, to this hollow of sorrow and truth, to this reunion carved out of ruin. The land itself seemed to pause with her, the canyon wind stilling as if to bear witness. Marla looked around, the sky bruised purple with twilight, the riverbed below reflecting the last light in dull shards, the smoke from the dying campfire twisting into the shape of ghosts. She could almost hear the echoes of laughter once carried across these same stones, the gentle rhythm of hooves in the corral before it burned, the lullabies of a life cut short. The fool's head rested against the mare's side now, eyes half closed, exhaustion overtaking vigilance, and Mara thought of her own child, the small hands she could no longer hold, the laughter she could never call back, and felt something shift inside her chest, something she hadn't let move in years. It wasn't healing, not yet, but recognition, the understanding that pain, when shared, becomes less like a wound and more like a bridge. She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, smearing dirt with salt, and breathed deep, the air sharp but clean. The mare stirred again, her ear flicking toward Mara, as if to acknowledge her presence, her gratitude, or perhaps her debt. Mara reached out, fingers brushing the animal's sweat-soaked neck, whispering nonsense comfort she didn't believe but needed to say. "It's all right," she murmured, her voice a thread. "You're home now." Home, such a simple word, and yet it caught in her mouth like a stone. The fowl lifted its head at the sound, gaze steady and unblinking, and in those dark, ancient eyes she saw the shape of something that wasn't coincidence. She thought of the miles they'd crossed, the hunger, the silence, the scars both carried, and understood that this creature had carried its story across the wilderness not for survival but for remembrance. It had led her to bear witness to what should not have been forgotten. A wind rose then, soft but sure, sweeping across the canyon, lifting ash and dust into the dimming sky, and Mara tilted her face toward it, eyes closed. The warmth of the sun's last rays brushed her cheek, and in that moment, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the past could still speak, through scars, through courage, through the fragile persistence of a small wild fool who refused to give up on the place where love had once lived. The morning came slow and gold, the kind that seeps into the bones of the world rather than rises, and Mara stood beneath the twisted oak that leaned like a tired sentinel over the corral ruins, its bark blackened from old fire and its roots clutching the earth like a hand unwilling to let go. Beside her lay the small bundle wrapped in a torn scrap of cloth, a child's bonnet, faded pink now turned to the soft gray of years and sorrow, and she knew without needing to ask that some lives, no matter how short, deserved to be laid to rest with gentleness. The ground here was hard-packed, dry and reluctant. But Mara had been breaking through hard things her whole life, and she dug with the calm steadiness of someone who understood what finality means. Each strike of the spade brought up not just soil but history, layers of ash, small stones, the faint scent of old smoke that rose like the ghost of memory. The foal stood nearby, its head low, the mare resting on her side, finally asleep in the deep, heavy way that only comes after long pain. The sight filled Mara with a sadness too big for tears and yet too beautiful to call despair. She paused once, leaning on the spade, breath fogging faint in the cool air, and looked around at what remained: the bones of the corral fence, the charred ribs of the barn, the silent expanse of land that had seen cruelty and grace in the same measure, and she felt something shifting in it, as if the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. She lowered herself to her knees, placed the bonnet carefully into the shallow grave, and for a long time, she didn't move. Her fingers brushed the delicate stitching, uneven, hand-sewn by someone who loved with clumsy devotion, and she could almost hear the laughter that once filled this place, the laughter of a child who had fed the foal's mother sugar cubes, who had sung to the wind because the world hadn't yet taught her what silence costs. The weight of that memory, of lives lost to greed and fire, pressed against Mara's chest until she had to speak or break. "You ain't alone now," she whispered, voice roughened by dust and truth. "Not you, and not mine either." She let her hand hover over the earth, then pressed it flat against the soil, feeling the coolness seep into her palm, a communion between grief and forgiveness. The prayer that rose from her wasn't polished. It had no words of scripture, only the raw cadence of a woman who had carried guilt too long. "For the child who lived here," she murmured, "and for the one I lost. May they find each other in kinder light." The breeze picked up then, rustling through the oak's half-burned leaves, and for an instant it sounded like the whisper of two small voices answering her. She filled the grave slowly, each handful of earth an act of reverence, tamping it down until the ground lay smooth and unbroken. The foal moved closer, lowering its muzzle to the mound, snorting softly as if to mark the place, and Mara reached out to stroke its neck. "You did good," she said quietly. "You brought us home." The words caught in her throat but didn't hurt this time. They tasted like something close to peace. The mare stirred beside them, her breathing steady now, the rise and fall of her chest rhythmic and unhurried, and in that sound, Mara heard life beginning again, cautious but sure. The air felt different, lighter somehow, like the land itself had forgiven what it had been forced to witness. The oak's branches swayed gently above, scattering light through the dust in small, golden motes that looked like blessings. Mara stood there for a long time, hat in her hands, wind threading through her hair, until the moment settled fully into her bones. She had not only buried the past, she had named it, honored it, and in doing so, freed it. When she turned to leave, the sun had climbed high enough to paint the ashes silver, and for the first time in years, the horizon didn't look empty. It looked alive. The dawn came slow and golden, spilling across the horizon like a promise too long withheld, and Mara sat astride her mirror watching it unfold, the first light catching in the thin veil of dust that hung above the ground and turning it into something almost holy. The world, which for so long had looked carved from bone and sorrow, seemed softened now, its edges blurred by forgiveness and by the quiet mercy that follows after violence has spent itself. Behind her, the foal trotted with uneven grace, its limp still there but lighter, each step more sure, the rhythm of its hoop sinking to the slow, steady gait of the mare as they made their way north toward home, or whatever word might mean safety now. The air smelled of sage and dew, the kind of morning scent that could almost convince a person the land remembered how to heal. Mara let her hat rest low over her eyes, not to block the sun but to let herself listen, to the sound of breathing that wasn't labored anymore, to the small rustle of life in the brush, to the silence that had ceased to accuse. Her hands felt strange on the reins, loose and easy, and she realized she was riding without the tightness that used to live between her shoulders, without the old readiness to fight or flee. The wolf's shadow stretched long beside her, and when she turned slightly in the saddle, she caught its gaze, those dark, earnest haze reflecting back not the ghost of loss but the shimmer of something impossibly gentle. "You're still following me," she said, and the words came out with a smile that trembled at the edges, breaking on a laugh that startled her in its softness. She hadn't laughed in years, not really, not from the part of her that still believed in beginnings, and the sound of it felt like wind moving through a long shuttered house, stirring up dust and letting in light. The foal tossed its head at her voice, as if answering, and the motion made her grin wider, her eyes wet not with grief this time but with the fragile kind of joy that carries memory without breaking under it. The trail ahead was long, winding through mesas and pale grasslands where the wind whispered in low tones, telling stories older than any name. Every turn looked different now, as if the light had rearranged the world while she wasn't watching, colors sharper, shadows kinder. She thought of Lottie, her little girl, of the days when laughter had filled their small ranch house and of how she used to imagine the world through her daughter's eyes, curious, unafraid, endlessly forgiving. For the first time, she didn't try to bury that thought. She let it rise, let it breathe, and in it found not the weight of guilt but the steady pulse of remembrance. She realized that grief, too, could become a companion if you walked beside it long enough. It could teach you how to see beauty again without flinching. The foal stumbled once, and Mara slowed her mare, waiting until it caught its stride, the way a mother waits for a child to find footing, patience written in every movement. The sun climbed higher, setting fire to the distant ridges, and the land began to hum with life. Coyotes calling far off, a hawk tracing circles in the rising thermals, the steady heartbeat of hooves against forgiving soil. Mara looked forward and felt something stir deep inside her chest, a faint warmth she had almost forgotten the name for, hope, fragile but alive, stubborn as the foal that had refused to quit. She touched the small silver locket at her throat, the one that had hung there for years unopened, and whispered, "We made it, kiddo." The wind carried her words away, scattering them across the plain, but she liked to think somewhere they were heard. As the trail curved toward home, the foal came to her side, brushing against the mare's flank, and in their shared rhythm, Mara felt the land, the memory, and her own heart fall into step at last. The frontier stretched wide before her, endless and wild, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.